afternoon and welcome to the March 16, 2022 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using as our state and community continue to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. This format enables the City Council to meet and take care of business while keeping everyone safe. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. And with that, thank you all for joining us on this sunny afternoon, and I will turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. This is our last work session before you go on your spring break. Totally looking forward to it. You've been getting a lot of comment. We're going to be talking about renter protections today. So I'm joined by several members from Planning and Development, but I believe Genevieve is going to be our hostess today. So Genevieve, you can just kick it off.
Thank you so much. It's nice to see you all. Let me share my screen. And then, how does that look? Wonderful. Great. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Genevieve Middleton. I'm the Grants Manager for Community Development. This past November, Council reviewed the Housing Policy Board's recommendation for renter protections and directed the City Manager to return with information about the feasibility and resources needed to implement those renter protections, plus 6 additional items. The motion passed unanimously. Today, I will be presenting the draft roadmap to renter protections and action items for you to consider. To start, I would like to take a minute to walk you through what you have in your agenda packet. Attachment A is the draft roadmap and is supported by Attachment B, an extended guide to the roadmap. Attachment C provides additional information and answers to questions that were requested or raised during the last work session. And Attachment D contains updated contextual information regarding local, state, and federal rental resources. In the interest of time, we're not going to go over Attachments C and D in our presentation today. I also want to take a moment to ground the renter protection recommendations in the city's housing implementation pipeline. The HIP's 5-year internal work plan is to coordinate current and future resources, goals, and priorities within a systems thinking approach to housing that Council approved in January. First, enhancing renter protections is identified as one of the anti-displacement actions in the high priority policies and program section of the HIP. And second, the HIP was drafted with the county's Technical Assistance Collaborative study on housing in mind. The tax landlord engagement strategy will create centralized and coordinated landlord and housing partner management in the effort to end homelessness. These renter protection recommendations will support that effort specifically for people experiencing homelessness. Since our November work session, the city has heard from a number of community members representing all points of view. Staff also reviewed renter protections with the city's Sustainability Equity Panel, which supported the proposals and offered honed perspectives on the usefulness and perceived impacts. Several community organizations representing a wide range of residents who may not be able to easily participate in public comment themselves engaged in conversations about renter protections, including St. Vincent de Paul, Lane Independent Living Alliance, and more. Staff responded to emails from the public by creating and emailing a new renter protections listserv, as well as emailing the existing rental housing programs interested parties list, all with a link to a dedicated city website on renter protections, including the history behind the Intergovernmental Housing Policy Board's recommendations. Generally, what Council has heard at public forums is the same as what has been relayed via email comments. What we have heard from the community has shaped the need for a phased approach that is presented to Council today. In addition to being a result of what we've heard from the community, this phased approach is also a result of our initial feasibility research. Specifically, we've heard that some think renter protections is not moving fast enough, while others feel it is moving too quickly. In addition to other factors, the phased approach is an opportunity to respond to the complex array of technical and legal questions that have come up. Council asked staff to identify what could be done the fastest, and phase 1 responds to that request, identifying 4 renter protections that can move forward more quickly. During the last work session, some councilors expressed concern regarding potential unintended consequences related to the adoption of renter protections. In staff's opinion, the phase 1 measures have minimal fiscal and other impacts on landlords, but will create valuable real-world protections for tenants. The second and third phases are more complicated, posing legal or administrative obstacles that need additional time for analysis. And finally, 3 items are not recommended to move forward due to implementation and legal challenges. I want to briefly begin our conversation with a high-level overview of the items in their respective phases. Here are the phase 1 renter protection recommendations that rose as the fastest and easiest to move forward. This includes number 1, a rental housing supportive services package and rental housing navigator. 2, requiring photo documentation of property conditions. 3, a requirement to provide a rental history reference without a 30-day notice to vacate. And 4, requirement to distribute a City of Eugene made and maintained educational document on local and state rental housing protections. Phase 2 protections require additional research and analysis on feasibility and the extent of the impact. The protections include number 5, limiting security, cleaning, and last month's rent deposits. 6, processing applications in the order received, first come, first served. And 7, displacement assistance for legal no-cause evictions. Phase 3 would be our final set of recommendations to receive further feasibility review. Number 8, ban application and screening fees. 9, medical and educational debt exclusion and a credit score limit. 10, loosening of minimum income screening standards. And number 11, a local prevention of no-cause evictions. Recommendations 12, 13, and 14 ran into challenges regarding the ability to implement or a lack of legal authority. For number 12, this item would be administratively burdensome to monitor and enforce. Community members would be better served through the proposed housing navigators work in item number 1 that's in phase 1. For number 13, a universal application portal would be time intensive and cost prohibitive to develop, operate, and maintain into the future. Examples of similar attempts have not worked or are on hold. And finally, for number 14, in addition to being administratively burdensome for the city to enforce and monitor, the Oregon Residential Landlord and Tenant Act already contemplates the landlord and tenant could agree to conduct repairs, routine maintenance, or cleaning services to a dwelling unit in exchange for a rent reduction. Now that I've provided a high-level overview of the items, let's look at the format for the roadmap. Shown on the slide is the header from the roadmap, and I'm going to walk through the additional columns. Activity refers to the area of coverage that each renter protection applies that we discussed in our previous work session, such as application, move in and out, and support services. The impacts categories are priority rental housing policy goal areas found in the housing implementation pipeline, state, and federal housing programs. Impacts are noted for each item with a full circle for regular impact and an outline circle for partial impact. What's shown here today is based off of preliminary research of impacts and may be refined when the roadmap is updated. Keeping people housed, in orange, represents an action that will prevent or ameliorate evictions, provide supports that can improve a tenant's knowledge about their rights, and improve the length of time that a tenant has in accessing another rental unit. Components of rental housing affordability, shown in blue, represents opportunities to lessen the costs associated with rental housing that are in addition to annual rents. Housing racial equity, shown in green, represents opportunities to stop discriminatory rental housing practices that can impact renter ability to acquire, maintain, or be financially capable of future housing. The last three columns are feasibility considerations. The phase one bundle of items is a revenue-backed proposal based on increasing the rental housing code door fee to create and administer a new renter protections program. The cost would include staffing for the housing navigator position, code enforcement, and data management, plus related non-staffing costs. The estimated cost for code enforcement will depend in part on what council chooses to include in the package and how many complaints are received. For implementation, all of the phase one items will be implemented via code amendment. And lastly, for enforcement, all would have complaint-based code enforcement. Now let's look at items proposed for phase one in more detail. Item number one to be considered today is to fund a housing navigator position, expand and manage rental housing data, code enforcement of the protections council chooses to apply, and tenant support services, such as a tenant hotline and an eviction diversion program, all with funds from an increased rental housing code door fee. The housing navigator will also assist with solutions and support for ex-offenders who struggle to qualify for rental housing, as well as supporting community members who need ADA compliant units. Along with the other phase one items, this would be implemented via code amendment, with the exception of the rental housing code fee increase. That would be accomplished via administrative order. Item number two to be considered today is to require landlords to itemize and photo document property condition at move in and move out, and to itemize and photo document withholdings from security deposits. This encourages the fair handling of necessary repairs or replacements, reducing the likelihood of disputes, benefiting both landlords and tenants. Item number three to be considered today is to require landlord at tenant written requests to provide rental history as a reference for a tenant who has not yet given notice. This protects renters by allowing them to secure housing in a tight market over a longer period than 30 days. And item number four to be considered today is to require landlords to distribute, together with any written rental agreement, an educational document describing Senate Bill 608 regarding terminations. The city would be responsible for creating, updating, and posting the educational material. Any local renter protections would be included, plus information about the rental housing code program. Currently, a pamphlet about the rental housing code program is mailed by the city to rental addresses registered with the rental housing code program. And in closing, I'd like to frame your discussion with two questions here. Does council support moving forward with phase one protections? And does council want staff to bring back the feasibility and resources needed to implement the phase 2 and 3 recommendations? If council has interest in moving forward with the phase 1 protections, the next steps would be for staff to draft an ordinance to amend the code over the next couple of months, council to hold a public hearing on the ordinance, and council to take action on the ordinance. If council has interest in continuing to explore the phase 2 and 3 protections, staff can conduct the needed additional analysis and return with an updated roadmap for council direction. We look forward to your discussion and are available for your questions now.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this work and appreciate the timeline. And it is extremely helpful given the emotional impact of some of the testimony we've heard and the sense of urgency around this to have it presented to us in such a clear kind of objective way. So I just appreciate the way you've laid this out for us to have further conversations. And with that, I see two counselors with hands raised. So I'll turn it over to Claire and then to Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor. I have got a lot to say, so I'll probably need more than one round, but thank you, staff, for this work. I do appreciate it. I am disappointed we aren't ready to do more today. but I understand capacity is challenging. I want to just start out by saying I think it's very important for us as a council and the community to recognize that one of the reasons we are facing even having this conversation of do we need more renter protections is because of the incredibly low vacancy rate we have in this community. That creates all sorts of dynamics in which renters are competing with one another for very few rental units. And if we had a higher vacancy rate, people would not be as challenged in finding alternative housing should they be, for example, no cause evicted. Now, that doesn't mean we might not want some of these protections, but I think there's just a larger context that's important to recognize. And, you know, the council is looking through our housing implementation pipeline to try to get at some of that, but that's a longer term situation. Second, I wanted to respond because I'll just offer a personal note. I've been struggling with health challenges these last couple of weeks, and so I've not been necessarily as engaged with public forum in the evening as I might be, and so I haven't responded there. But some of my thoughts around, first, I appreciate all the public input we've received, both at public forum and via email. But we've heard a lot from landlords that we should have data, we need better data. But I would say while data is important, just as important are the lived experiences of our residents, which have been shared with us in multiple ways and multiple times, and which cannot be easily captured in a set of data points. And we cannot ignore that simply because we haven't wrapped it up into some kind of numeric equation. There's been criticism that these recommendations were based on a survey that was not scientific, that was taken many years ago and brought to the Renter Protection Board. As a general rule, the city does not conduct scientific surveys. Scientific surveys require a whole set of dynamics, including a control group, which is not something the city does. And this council understands that surveys that we take are a snapshot of those who responded to the survey. And typically, in my opinion, we give our surveys the appropriate weight, knowing that, you know, they're not of the whole community and they're just a slice of it. So those are some of my initial thoughts, and I look forward to another round. Thanks, Mayor.
Got it. Jennifer and then Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Genevieve, for this presentation. You had two questions at the end, so I'll try to answer them. So the first one, do I want to move forward the phase one items? Absolutely. I think you've done a good job of explaining their purpose and how they would work, and that they're backed with funding. I am comfortable with moving all of those ahead. Your other question was about so I also say that I'm comfortable also moving ahead the displacement assistance based on the Portland model, as well as capping the application fee at $10. I think those are both ready to go, and we could move them forward to a public hearing to hear final thoughts from people before we made a final decision. The other group, you wanted to know if we wanted you to research and come back with code. I'd also like to get some more information about the two. I've gotten feedback that they might affect loans and financing. Actually some kind of conflicting, but I'd really like to have information about that and what that real world implications of those would be, so that we have all the information on the table when we make the decision. So if that can be part of that packet of information, that would be great. Let's see. I think that is it for now. And I will wait to see what other folks have to add.
Okay, thank you, Matt, and then Emily.
Mayor, Genevieve, thanks for the presentation. May I ask if you could put that last slide up, because I want to be sure to answer the questions succinctly that you posed, please. Does council support moving forward with phase one protections? This councilor does. Thank you, Genevieve. And I would submit that any of the items that have the orange bubble in the keeping people housed bucket would be an urgent need that would need to be considered in phase one as well. So I want to add my voice to advancing item number 7 and item number 11 for that matter. But also I'm looking at items number 8, 9, and 10. They don't have any circle in them at all. Those are banning application and screening fees, prohibiting landlords from including medical and education debt in regards to a credit score, and loosening monthly gross income screening standards. I would submit that all 3 of those items, 8, 9, and 10, partially keep people housed. So I would enthusiastically add my voice to advancing those items as well. I do want to thank everyone who provided public testimony. I think that we heard from landlords equally as we did tenant rights and renters' rights advocates. There are 53% of our community rent, and approximately 1% are local landlords. We heard consternation that the committees within the poverty within the PHB weren't fairly representative, but I would submit when the 53% versus 1% numbers are in front of us, I think that there was a community that arguably may have been overrepresented on said committee and may have been overrepresented in providing testimony. And on that note, I would welcome next time council has a retreat and we discuss our best practices and norms, I would welcome some agreement that prioritizes our local residents, our constituents, in regards to public testimony. We heard from a wide array of folks from outside the Eugene Springfield area. Oftentimes, our local residents would log on. They have until 7:35 to sign up for public testimony. And folks from out of town signed up well before them and were in the queue, and we heard from them often. And I don't, as much as I appreciate the educational aspect of gathering input and data from a wide variety of sectors, I would suggest that public testimony is meant for the public for whom we are responsible, i.e. our constituents. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I have Emily and then Greg.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for this succinct presentation. Being our liaison to the Housing Policy Board, I can tell you that it took many, many meetings, and we originally had a list of, 50 items, and I said, no way can you bring that many to council. So we coalesced, and that was a great synopsis. I'm 100% for the phase 1 recommendations. I think they're very reasonable. If I have to pick one, it would be the navigator position because it covers so many of our challenges. On the next one, the thing I've heard the most about is the displacement reimbursement, so people can actually get another place to live. And going along with that, number 11 about banning no-cause evictions, I have a question. When you have a lease for a year, this is how it was when I used to rent long ago, and your year was coming up around, 10 and a half months, you'd be thinking about whether or not you wanted to renew the lease, and also whether or not the landlord was willing to renew the lease. So is that still true? Or if you're already renting on a 1-year lease, do they have to give you a 2nd-year lease? And if not, I'm a little confused as to what the problem would be, although I know there's a problem. Can you help me with that?
Sure, good question. The logistics of the answer to that are in state law in SB 608. And so the question was, are the logistics of a lease renewal the same as they were? They're still the same as they were with the opportunity for a lease renewal prior to 1 year.
So if you decide not to renew the lease, then you wouldn't owe any relocation money.
According to the Portland's relocation assistance program, yes.
It seems it would be a little strange to have completed a financial agreement and then be required to continue it when it was already done. I don't know how often that happens now, that people just, stop after a year. And then of course it's the same problem. You have to have first, last, and security. So anyway, that's a tough one for me. But I think that displacement is one of our really big challenges, and it's keeping people from housing and obviously getting them out of housing. So I'm really interested in pushing forward with that one as much as we can, or the moratorium on them. On the ones that we can't move forward, my biggest disappointment is the universal application, but I understand how that's beyond our abilities to do that. Again, thank you for taking this huge thing that I used to work with and making it so clear, especially the 3 areas of what we can and can't do. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and then Randy. You're still muted, Greg.
I hate Zoom. Anyway, I appreciate the work that the staff has done, particularly with the AIS and the roadmap. And I want to call council's attention to the green bullet in attachment B, housing racial equity. I think that the information that is contained in bullet B is not just reflective of national statistical averages, but I think that you would find that equally reflective locally as well. Now, I know you'll have some people that say, we don't do that. We don't discriminate on the basis of race. We don't evict people, or we don't deny people access to rental units because of what they look like. But quite frankly, that goes on all the time. I have heard about it for years. Actually, I was a victim of it at one point in time. So, having experience of being a renter and then a homeowner, it gives you a really clear perspective about the struggles that people who are renting have, and particularly people who have limited incomes. Most of folks who we're dealing with and that are dealing with these issues have limited incomes, and they don't have discretionary incomes where they can go out and, to a restaurant, have a pizza, go to a movie, or whatever the case may be. They're just trying to cover the rent and pay utilities. The second thing that I think that we really need to look at in terms of moving this ordinance forward and these protections forward is our timeline. We've been talking about this for a long time. And I think that we really need to, hopefully before we leave this meeting this afternoon, establish a timeline. If we can get through phase 1, protections, and have some agreement around that, I would like us to be able to deal with phases 2 and 3 and be able to say that we can get this done before our next break, which would be at the end of July.
Thank you. Randy and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Guinevere, for the succinct presentation. That always helps when we're trying to weigh issues like this. Renter protection has been an emotional issue for people on both sides of this issue, and I think it's important that folks know that we recognize that. At the same time, with our paltry 1.6% rental vacancy rate, I mean, we have a problem here. And it does concern me. I am in support of moving forward phase one. I do want to see that, of course, in the final code version and listen to public testimony at the public hearing for that. But those seem pretty clean to me. As we get into phase two and phase three, I think the discussion becomes a little more difficult. The consequences in both directions become a little more pronounced. And I think it's important that we understand the cause and effect relationships of our decisions as best we can up front. But my question for the city manager is, I'm also concerned with experience as we start going down this path. And will there be regular check-ins with council? Is that something you need a motion made and passed by council to follow up with? Written reports are nice, but I think this is a big enough issue for our community. It would be nice to have periodic points, touch points where we do see the changes in the environment and realize any consequences to the decisions we are making, such as the 11-month short rental agreement pieces that have come out of some of the state work. So, I mean, I think it's important that we're able to understand and adjust. So that's my question to you, City Manager.
Yeah, so it really, I think what I would say is, what we were recommending was this phased approach, which means we'll be coming back with a public hearing, coming back with some code language. We could, during that time, sort of identify what are the data points you want to follow. So what I'm hearing now is a desire to move more of the things forward or all of the things forward. And we haven't really talked about one. I don't even know if all of them are legal. We haven't done all of the analysis. So I would need a little bit more time to understand what it is you want to track and how we're going to do it. So that would, my assumption is that we're providing a roadmap of how to get there. And as we take step by step, we'll lock in what you want to get more information about. If you take them all today, it's hard for me to say yes, and we'll do it on this schedule, but I'll keep thinking about that.
Thank you, City Manager. And I understand the feeling of urgency by renters that we move faster, bigger, but at the same time, I like the phased in approach. I think it gives us a chance to kind of digest this as we go. But at the same time, just to be clear, City Manager, the piece I'm really looking for, and I like looking, projecting out and seeing what we think the changes are going to do. But I would really like to hear more concrete information on what the effect is. I mean, are we losing inventory? Are people selling off their rentals? Have they adjusted with actions that are creating new challenges for renters? And I just think to have this broad scope understanding of what's happening is important. And I may need a second round, Mayor, but for now I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alan and then Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I commented the other work session that I found an email working on this 6 years ago. So we've been working on this for a long time with lots of public input from all sides. Very much appreciated all the people weighing in from all the different angles and sides to this. It's good input into the council as we deliberate towards a decision. I understand the phased approach and the limited staff capacity that we have, and wish we could do more sooner, but I understand how this works and support it. To me, some of the more interesting statistics that came out of why we're doing this, besides the stuff that Claire said, was in attachment C, number 7 on page 16, it said National Low Income Housing Coalition annual report on housing affordability called Out of Reach. There is no county in America where a renter working 40 hours a week earning minimum wage can afford a 2-bedroom house without spending more than 30% of their income. That's startling. And in Eugene, 50% of renters are cost burdened. And 56% of renters are cost burdened. 86% are extremely cost burdened that are low income. And 33% of all renters are severely rent burdened. So that's the urgency behind all of this. Another statistic that was interesting to me was on number 3, where we talked about the landlords. While small landlords owning 1 or 2 properties is 86% of the landlords, it's only 12% of the properties or units. So there's a disparaging way of viewing about that we think we need to take into consideration. I had a question on number 4 in attachment C, which is in 2022, we saw a 22% increase in rental properties. On number 4 on page 14.
I think that's a question about the rental housing code. Is that correct? I have that right. And Rochelle is on the Zoom. If maybe, Rochelle, could you speak to that? Doesn't look like
Sorry, y'all. I was trying to get unmuted.
Thank you.
Rochelle Nicholas with Planning and Development. So for 2002 or 22, is that what you asked, Councilor Slanka?
Yeah.
We did see a big increase between 2019 and 2022. I don't know where that jump is between those 2 years. I'd have to go back and look at the data, but we did see an increase in those 2 years.
Yeah, it's a pretty steep jump. The answer to question 1 is yes. I'm ready to move the 4 things forward. I'm also okay with the cap of $10 and displacement services number 7 being moved into this as well. Number 2, I'm in favor of moving forward with phase 2 and phase 3, but 6 years is a long time. I don't want this to drag on. When I work with my staff, when they come up with good ideas, I say, great idea. Who's going to do it and when are they going to do it by? So, and I really think that deadlines are good. They make you do stuff. And so I'm in favor of moving that. I have a motion that I put forward to have some timelines on that I'll get to. And I will need another round.
Okay, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Genevieve, for the presentation, and the answers to your questions from me are maybe and no. Okay. I want to appreciate some of the things I heard my colleagues say, especially Claire up front. I think she's 100% right. What we have is a supply problem. And while there are a couple parts of the phase 1 pieces that I don't think are a problem and I think are a good idea. 2 of them I have some issues with, but I want to be careful because the things we're talking about, even in phase 1, have the effect of increasing the cost to the landlord, and the things certainly in phase 2 do. And Alan's point was incredibly important about no county in the country being able to have rental housing that didn't at least eat up 30%. When we increase the cost to landlords, we increase the cost to renters because they're the ones who are going to pay it. And my concern is if we move too fast and put a lot of things into a new code that will be very expensive, there are current laws that prevent the landlord from absorbing that cost in a rent increase without evicting the tenant. And I think Randy's point to unintended consequences being something we should really think about is a critical piece here, because we could end up putting landlords in the position of evicting a lot of folks in order to have a rent that absorbs the costs that we're adding on. So, and to do so under the legal cap, that's their only alternative, is to turn the unit. So I really hate to see us have the effect, the negative unintended consequences be things like, you know, when I was a renter up until a year ago, I had a local older lady who was my landlord, and sweet lady, and treated me very kindly and very fairly. I thank goodness for that, and I didn't have to go through a property management firm, because I hear most of the complaints from the anecdotal stuff we hear coming from those who are dealing with a property management firm or an out-of-town company. If you live in Eugene, after all the things we're talking about passing, and you own a rental, why in the world would you keep managing it yourself and not turn it to a property management firm that has the legal advice to deal with this stuff, would end up costing less and can evict people easier? I mean, the outcome that will happen from overregulation of this, I think, will be far worse on renters. And for me, that's the big concern, is that a lot of this stuff is well-intentioned, but the actual effect will be a massive kick and a problem for renters more than anyone else. I need a second round.
Okay, thank you. I have a number of counselors queued up for a second round, but I just want to ask a question myself. I'm wondering, Jennifer, if you could actually speak to us about the timeline, because on the displacement actions in particular, I'm wondering if you could clarify what are the issues that made you put that in a phase 2 as needing more work. It might help with this conversation.
Sure. Thinking about your question in a couple of components. The first being looking at the phases, where the approach would be staggered. And so coming back with phase 2 feasibility would be staggered right behind coming back with the draft code ordinance. And then we would make headway on what phase 2 reveals, and then follow that same process with phase 3. Displacement assistance for legal no-cause eviction. In Portland, it's called relocation assistance. And there are examples, and if we were to follow that exactly, then there is legal allowance. But I think that staff haven't had time to do the research to know if following Portland's example exactly is what's best and fits with the criteria of what Eugene has to offer. Some of the relocation assistance issues are regards to what triggers relocation assistance or displacement assistance. So is that trigger just a legal no cause, a legal no cause eviction, but also if there's a rent hike, what is the percentage? So what is the threshold percentage of the rent hike that causes someone to not be able to afford there and therefore have to leave, right? The other second question is in regards to what are the actual numbers of displacement assistance? So is this based on rent, or is Portland's, for example, is based on the number of rooms per unit? So a single or a studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedrooms or more bring different levels. And so are those numbers that they have exactly correct for Eugene is a question that we still have out. So those are the questions around why number 7 made it into phase 2 and was essentially about needing to understand what all of those different number implications are and what they mean and what's right for Eugene, while also not holding back the components of phase 1 that are ready to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up question to that. So when we're talking about that timeline, if the council approved phase 1, that would come back for a public hearing this spring, presumably. And the phase 2 would come back to us when?
We're hoping to have phase 2 come back in the fall.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. All right, I will turn it over to you, Claire, and then Matt for second rounds.
Thank you, Mayor. So I support moving the phase 1 items forward. And I know there are some counselors who want to move the displacement assistance and a cap on fees forward into phase 1. So I'm inclined to put a modified version of our motion in our packet out there, but I am a little concerned about getting ahead of things on the displacement protection, because I think that's a little more complicated. So on the fees, you know, we actually got a helpful email from a landlord yesterday, I think it was, who kind of articulated and parsed out different parts of what we're considering and spoke to the fees issue, including the idea of cost sharing. So that made me wonder if, you know, one additional aspect could be a disclosure requirement. What are the fees used for? What is the cost to the landlord for the screening and application processing that they're doing? In my meeting with staff, I told them I would want to know what are the costs landlords incur for screening and application process. Are they charging for their time to do this? What does it cost to run a credit check? Are they running a background screen? Are they using a service? What does that cost them? So, I mean, I think there's more that we can learn there. I did want to comment, I also, on the phase 1 and the idea of instead of requiring kind of a 3-day holding open period, so folks with who need ADA accessible units can find those. I really like the idea of our navigator being part of that. And staff has already indicated that there's an intention to partner with Lane Independent Living Alliance, which is a service provider for people with disabilities, as a way to help people with disabilities connect with appropriate housing. I just wanted to comment that, you know, these recommendations are not the same as what Portland implemented. And a lot of the landlord input we're getting is hearkening to their fears and worries and the outcomes that they see there. These were more shaped to our local needs. There's been a lot of concern about huge amounts of liability. Now, I appreciate Councilor Clark's cautionary flag about increased costs. I think that is a dynamic that could be at play, but we're not proposing things that would make people liable for thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars in fees or such. That's just not the approach that we have been taken. So those are my comments. I'll reserve my next round for putting motions on the table. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Matt, and then I have Randy.
Great, Mayor, thanks. I just got 3 quick things. Councilor Semple brought up at the top of this conversation, signing a year lease. I recognize, Councilor, that you, and I thank you for mentioning that you've rented before. I just want to mention that Becca and I signed an 8-month lease. And we're not alone, that quite often landlords will engage in an agreement under that year. That's the new norm, to give them the flexibility should they so desire. Hence why the local prevention of or moratorium on no cause evictions number 11 is so critical. That's number 1. Number 2, I am in favor of all 14, even though 12, 13, and 14 aren't in our wheelhouse, of course. I would ask that since we have our IGR committee here, Chair Syrett, Councilor Groves, Councilor Evans, and our mayor, our ex officio member of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, that those be addressed at the state level, especially considering we heard from landlords asking for a state fix. And I want to thank Representative Nancy Nathanson for previously attempting to advance a semblance of a universal application portal. That one-stop shop will be a tremendous fix statewide. And I would ask, even though they're not on the table for council to advance legally, 12, 13, and 14, that our IGR committee consider advancing them and advocating for them at the state level in the 2013 legislative session. And finally, Mayor, number 3, it's not part of the 14 points in front of us, but I would love to see the committee, whether it's IGR or within the Poverty Homeless Board, consider a reduction or a cap on pet deposits and preventing weight limits and preventing breed limits. I say this as a pet owner who found it most challenging to find a rental with my 125-pound senior Great Dane pictured behind me. But that's not in front of us today. I would just say thank you to my colleagues who are recognizing the importance of advancing at least number 7 and either 8, 9, or 10 in that phase 1 approach. Thanks, staff, for putting this together. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Randy and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Keating, is Vegas a horse or a dog? Anyway, in all seriousness, I really appreciate what Councilor Keating just said about state solutions. That's honestly where I think a lot of this should live. Then it doesn't put one community at a disadvantage to another community as far as places to dwell. My question, I do have a question for you, Guinevere, on the displacement relocation assistance. Is there any limitations on where the relocation will be? I mean, for example, does it only apply to displacement relocation within Eugene, or does the assistance also, if somebody's moving to Los Angeles? Are there any sideboards there?
I am not sure if Portland's model has any information about where you relocate to. So that's part of more of the research that needs to be done. So we can write down that question and let you know.
Well, I'd be curious about that. And I'd also be curious, what Portland's experience has been with that piece. So that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay, Alan, I had you on the list earlier for a second round. So Alan and then Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I agree that a lot of these things should be at the state level, but a lot of state action level follows local action. A great example is paid sick leave, where Eugene struck out and implemented paid sick leave, and it wasn't for our leadership and our action at the state level, I don't think we would have a paid state sick leave statewide benefit that we have today. So I'm in favor of moving this locally and nudging the legislature to do more. The eviction moratorium, I'm a little bit confused by what it says in attachment C on number 14, where it says you have to have your information documentation to landlord by June 30th, but then you get protection through no later than September 22. How does that work? On page 19 of attachment C.
So the last part of your question was protection no later than September, or did you say June?
September.
So as it stands, you can apply for the way that the protection works is no more, let's see, how do I put it? You get 90 days. So that September has to do with the 90 days after June. So the evictions get capped on June 30th, but they're protected for 90 days after that. Is that?
Yeah, if you get information of the landlord, you get 90 days after that.
That's that.
Okay, I got it.
Okay.
One of those things that's not in the 14 that I thought was really interesting in number 10 on page 17, attachment C, was rapid return of screening fees. I've heard that that's a problem, and no more than 60 days seemed like a very reasonable thing. I'm wondering if that is going to be part of number 8 in our phase 3 stuff, or could it be? And I would request that it does. I was talking about deadlines before I ended, and I think that having information get back to us is really important. I support getting back to us on phase 1 before we go on summer break, but also I'll make a motion about phase 2 and phase 3, and I'll just read it right now, but I'll make it later. Bring back information on the feasibility, implementation, and resources needed to implement phases 2 and 3, and provide council with actionable information on phase 2 by November 1st, 2022, and phase 3 by February 2023. And by actionable, I mean ready to move to public hearing. So I'll make that at the appropriate time. And then I like the one-stop application process, and I would support IGR taking that up. That makes a lot of sense to me. And then finally, Norton Cobble, who worked on this for a long time, recently passed away, and he was a big advocate of moving a lot of this stuff forward. And we typically don't do it, but I would like to call this the Norton Cobble Renter Protection Act. I don't know if we do that officially or unofficially, but that's something I think would be a good honor for Norton and all the work he did for actually decades in this community in this area. So when it comes time to make a motion about phase 2 and phase 3, Mayor, I'd like to do that. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you. All right, Mike, and then Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. There's just so many things I want to pull apart here and ask questions about, and I'm struck by how long we've worked on this, and yet how much there is we don't know, and we're hoping. And one of the comments made was we don't think that costs will go up dramatically, or we don't think that we will be driving an exodus of landlords. I'd really hope that we're going to measure that, as Randy has suggested. Because as a landlord, if you just think this is too complicated to have to deal with, or you're backed into a corner you can't live with because of the increase in risk, your only choice is to sell or hire somebody to do it professionally. And at the end of the day, if we see a bunch of folks sell, we may end up with fewer rentals, at least that are homes as opposed to apartments. And we've all agreed already that we have a supply problem, and that's the big issue. So it is possible that our actions could in effect drive supply down and make it worse. And that's my biggest fear with this, is that will be the outcome and hurt renters more. Costs then will continue to go up. A lot of these things add cost. And why in the world, with the complexity of it, anybody would ever get a deposit back again? I have no idea why a landlord would do that if you have an increase in costs. I mean, there's all different manner of ways one might recoup that with the change in circumstance of a unit, but let's not go through that. This is a question, I think, for Catherine, although I'm not certain. I'm not deeply conversant in Senate Bill 608, okay? But I guess the basic question I have is, can a landlord create a lease whose provisions are counter to anything in 608 or counter to city policies that we're creating?
I see Lauren Summers, Assistant City Attorney, popped on, so I'm going to defer to her. I appreciate her turning her video on.
Or is there some provision in 608 that says, no, you may not create a private lease contrary to any of these laws?
Councilor Clark, I'm not sure that my answer will hit the entire scope of your question. So if it doesn't, let me know and we can talk more about it. But the thrust of 608 is what council has been discussing this whole time, which is it generally limits the opportunity for no cause evictions. So an eviction where the tenant has not in any way breached the rental agreement. It says, you know, after the first year, whether it's a month to month, lease or a fixed term lease, basically the landlord cannot evict for no cause. There are a list of reasons that the landlord could ask.
And can the landlord add to that list as they see fit? Reasons for eviction?
No, I would say no.
Okay, let me ask that question differently. Does a landlord have any control over what conditions they would put into a lease that would result in eviction? Or does state law limit what they can put in that?
Councilor Clerk, that's a probably a more detailed question than I'm equipped to answer today. There are Senate Bill 608 does include a specific list of conditions that are not no cause evictions for which a landlord could evict a tenant. There are opportunities in a lease agreement to identify, what would constitute a breach of the lease agreement. But I'm not sure, I'm not currently familiar enough with the Oregon Residential Landlord Tenant Act to be able to list those out for you today and to say, in this scenario, landlords and tenants have some ability to negotiate a condition, but not over here. We can certainly bring that information back to you if you'd like.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I think we're heading into an awful Pandora's box with this because of the force that we're putting into play with some of it. The last thing I would say with my 20 seconds is I agree with the provision of photograph and document everything. That's great. Move in and move out. But how do you document smells that exist that didn't, or drains and things below ground that no longer work and no longer drain when they did before, or any of a host of other kinds of damages that someone ought to be liable for? How do you document that stuff? Anybody? I'd love to have staff's answer on
that. I can jump in there. The specifics that we're talking about are, you pointed out this is the ways that a property can be damaged during time there's a lot there. What we're trying to do is take one step forward on creating more certainty and a cleaner arrangement between the landlord and the tenant. It can never be foolproof, but what the two parts of this are photo documentation and itemization of items. And so if there's a noted smell as you walk through a space, then that's something that can be listed. There's still a possibility for disagreement between landlords and tenants when it comes to move out and potential damages. And so I don't know if it's possible to get to a place where there's no questions, but this is one step towards creating a clear baseline for them to work forward with.
Mike, if you need another, I'll give you.
I just want to make one statement. I'm not going to do an Allen of 30 seconds here, but my point is, why would anybody ever expect to get a deposit back when there's a number of ways to absorb the extra costs we're adding? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Greg, and then Jennifer, and then I see the city manager has something to say.
You have to forgive me, I'm under attack from allergies right now. But one of the things I like to say is, I'm mostly in agreement with Alan around timeline issues. I would like to see us do it sooner. I'm understanding that, because of the complexity of what we're dealing with right now, that having a deadline of July 31st may not be really feasible. And then we're looking at getting into phase 2 more in depth in the fall. I would like to move that up a little bit and see if we can't do phase 2 and phase 3 in the fall and try to put this to bed at the end of our session right before we go out for the holiday. And the reason why I say this is that there's an increasing level of frustration of people that I have talked to about this. in terms of the length of time that we have been deliberating this on council and going back and forth about these protections. And you know, for renters want some semblance of certainty, as they want some semblance of protection, and they want us to move a little bit faster than what we already have moved. And my general thoughts in terms of how we proceed with code and ordinances and different types of legislative activities and actions is that, okay, let's set out a marker out there. If it isn't perfect, which most of the time it is not perfect, we can always go back and fix it. We have the opportunity. I mean, we're not putting something up. This is not the death penalty, you know, where you can't turn that around. We can always go back and fix things. So if something is not working, or something is not working the way that it was intended to work, then, you know, let's set out a marker. Let's put out a benchmark. Let's put together, a piece of an ordinance that will, for the most part, give both landlords and renters some sense of certainty about what the rules are and what is allowable and permissible and what is not permissible. And let's talk about then, okay, if something is not working, we can go back and we can tweak it and we can fix it. But I think that we really need to have some deadlines here, and we need a timeline to be able to give back to the public. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm way over my time.
Thank you. Jennifer, and then I'm going to turn it over to the city manager.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to agree with Councillor Evans. We don't have a crystal ball for any subject, but what we do know is that people are struggling and they're suffering. And putting it off longer is only going to make more people struggle and suffer. So I think that a November deadline is very disappointing for things to be coming back. I agree that we need to move that up so that we can address these very serious issues. I had a question for staff. I want to clarify. My understanding is that if we model our displacement assistance after Portland's model, it has been vetted in the courts. That's correct?
So yes, that's correct. Portland's assistance program was challenged in the Oregon Supreme Court and found acceptable.
So, and I apologize, I interrupted you there for a second. I have one last question. It is based off of the number of bedrooms, but we could adjust those numbers as long as we're using the same model. We could change the amounts. Is that correct or incorrect?
I think there is some flexibility to, yes, do things like change amounts and still feel good about the kind of falling within the protection of the Oregon Supreme Court's decision. If this Eugene's model starts to move too far away from Portland's model, right, then we risk kind of stepping into that protection. And exactly what those movements are is hard to say without a proposal. So, but I think you're right. There is a little bit of flexibility.
Okay. Yeah. So I see no reason why we can't move forward a cap on our application fees and move forward displacement assistance. We need to keep people in their homes, and people are desperate right now. And this is the least we can do while we get those other things more vetted out and get some more information. Thank you.
Thank you. Manager.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that sentiment. I think what I would be trying to help council realize is that we did sort of bring forward a roadmap that we thought is still pretty aggressive for a small team that's also working on all the other elements of the housing implementation pipeline, urban renewal, all the other things that are coming forward. So if you start pulling things out of phase 2 that we haven't researched yet and putting them into phase 1, it just slows it down a little bit. So the whole thing just slows instead of saying, here are the things we're pretty confident, and then here's the next thing, and here's the next thing. So I'm a little concerned that even the questions that are coming up today that you're asking a lot about are in the future phases that we've identified. We need to do a lot more research on that. So anyway, I feel like I have to say that because you guys have asked me to watch out for the well-being of staff, and you've asked us to also do some pretty aggressive things around planning and development. So I'm not saying you can't move it forward. You obviously can. It just may slow phase 1 down a little bit.
Okay, Alan.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify what I was suggesting in terms of timeline. I was suggesting that the phase 1 stuff come back to us, schedule public hearing as fast as we can, and then have that come back to us for action before we go on summer break. That's phase 1. That's 4 months. That's a reasonable amount of time given the staff capacity constraints that we have. And then have phase 2 come back to us by November 1st, which is an additional 3 months after that. That has all the sticky issues in it. I don't think we can move that into July or the end of July, because it's just, we don't have the staff capacity to do that. I would love to do this faster. I've been waiting 6 years for this. So, but having phase 1 done before we go on summer break, having phase 2 come back to us for actionable, meaning ready to go to public hearing by November 1st, and then phase 3 come back to us in February, I think is really a reasonable time frame given the staff constraints that we have. I'd love to have it go faster than that, but I don't think that's really realistic. We can say that, but we might not. It might get back to us that we're not able to do that. So, so I think the July, November 1, and February timeframe actually makes a lot of sense. And hopefully, Claire, if you could add that in as a friendly, that would be great.
Okay, Emily, I saw your hand up. Or did you still have something to say?
Alan asked most of it, but is that timeline doable to do the phase 1 before summer and phase 2 by November? Because I don't want to ask for something that's not doable.
I can speak to that. That timeline seems reasonable to us. It allows us to continue to move on the other items that the city manager mentioned, including gearing up on the HIP and the other rental housing or affordable housing production that we've been doing. The one clarification I would ask is when you say actionable, ready to move forward to public hearing, my understanding is that you're talking about a work session similar to this, where we've got a very clear set of those items, and then the next step would be to schedule a public hearing. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Right. Similar to right now. Yeah.
In that case, that feels like a very reasonable timeline for us to hit, and of course, we will try to do better wherever we could.
Thank you for all of that. I would just say one other thing about this, and then I'll turn it over to Claire. Even though I agree with Jennifer and Greg that you can fix things after the fact, there is a cost to fixing things after the fact, and potentially a deep cost. So sometimes it's worth it to take an extra month or two to get it right, or closer to right the first time, than move faster and get it wrong and then have to come back and fix it. So I'm just caution about when we're being told by staff that they need some time to assess the data, and that, you know, that's important information for us. So just thinking about that time frame, it's hard to get everything done as quickly as we want. All right, Claire, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. So I've amended the motion that's in the AIS based on this conversation, and also because I'm council president and get to put the motion out, what I think is reasonable. I was inclined to add the displacement assistance into phase 1, but I think that might cause as the city manager says, further delay of phase one. So I'm going to put a motion out. If people want to try to put substitute motions out to change it, that's how this works. Move to direct the city manager to schedule a public hearing prior to council's summer's break and action on the protections included in phase one as described in the AIS, and to include number 8, the application fee cap into phase one, and provide council with actionable information on the remaining items of phase 2 by November of 2022 and phase 3 by February of 2022.
Second.
Just a correction, it would be February of 2023.
February 2023. Thank you. Good. That's why we have you here.
And was it November 1st?
Sure. Okay. Provide actionable information on items in phase 2 by November 1st of 2022 and phase 3 by February 1st of 2023.
Okay, we have people lined up to comment. So first, Mike and then Matt.
Thank you, Mayor. Sarah, why did you put the fee into phase 2? The fee cap, excuse me.
Yeah, I'd have to ask Genevieve and her team to answer that.
The question is in regards to number 6. Is that right, Councilor Clark?
The one that Claire dumped into phase
number 8. Why did we have the
Number
application fee cap in phase 2 initially?
Right now we have it as ban application and screening fees. It's a complete ban. And it sounded as if Councilor Surratt and Councilor Ye were implying to make it an application and screening cap of $10.
I think the question from Councilor Clark is why did we not include that in phase 1 to begin with?
Sure,
why is it a phase 2?
What's the problem with doing it now?
So capping the fee at $10 is not on the list. It's not any of the items. It's a revision to number 8. It's setting a floor of $10.
Why did we cap that idea of eliminating then, or excuse me, why did we not?
Banning
sorry,
it.
My frustration. Thank you. Why did we put that into phase 2 rather than phase 1? That item.
Certainly, yes. The in-depth legal review has not been completed on banning application fees. So that's why it's in phase 2.
Do you know, or can Catherine or can Lauren speak to the legality of capping?
I can. So the Oregon Residential Landlord Tenant Act doesn't actually use the term application fee, but they do talk about a couple of fees that I think would fall into the bucket of application fees: the screening fee, and then also a deposit to enter into a rental agreement. The deposit to enter into a rental agreement doesn't have any kind of dollar amounts associated with it. The screening fee, state law does set a ceiling on the amount of the screening fee. So a landlord is limited to either, I believe if they contract with a third party to do the screening, the cost to the landlord from the third party, or if they do their own screening, kind of a reasonable screening fee. The city has the authority to set a fee that is lower than that ceiling. So I think a cap of $10 is defensible. We just haven't done the, as Amanda said, the in-depth legal review about a ban of application fees altogether.
And do you imagine that it would be legally impermissible to create a new fee of some kind?
Councilor Clark, I think it would really depend on the fee and what is, how that interacts with state law and whether the city's fee and state law could operate concurrently.
I would assert again that we are not ready to answer this question. And to Greg's point, while I respect and appreciate that. I would echo the mayor and say the consequence of a landlord feeling incredibly burdened by what we're asking them to go through may well be that they give someone notice, kick them out, and sell the house. And yeah, we can come back and make some edits and changes, but that person's already lost their house, so that doesn't help much. So I really caution us to take staff's advice on this. Thanks.
Okay, Matt and then Greg.
Thanks, Mayor. Quick point of clarification, then a comment. Councilor Syrett, thank you for advancing number 8 in your motion, or a modified version of number 8. I believe you mentioned, or you referred to it as application without the screening fee attached. And so I just want to make sure that we're marrying those two, because it's on paper in front of us, but since we're moving it up a bucket, I want to make sure that we actually tie the two together. There's another, and if that can be accepted as a friendly amendment, I don't know if I can do that as the person who made the second to the motion.
I was going to clarify that. That's why I raised my hand.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then there are a whole slew of third-party fees that folks pay into, Zillow and House Hunter applications, hot pads, and folks are still going to be paying for those. You know, the what's in front of us doesn't address that, but it prevents the nickel and diming of folks who are just living paycheck to paycheck, who are looking for a place to live. I appreciate advancing a modified version of number 8. I would underscore a sense of urgency in regards to a timeline, and I'll leave my comments there, Mayor, possibly come back for a second round, but I urge colleagues to advance the councilor's motion. And if there are amendments or substitute motions that even advance the timeline, then I would be supportive of those as well. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Greg and then Jennifer.
Yeah, real quickly, Mayor, and then this is just friendly. And that would be to add number 7, displacement assistance for legal no cause evictions. I think that that's an important piece here, that if we can get it in now and not wait till later, that would be something that would be extremely helpful for a lot of our renters out there that are facing these situations. And we heard that in testimony the other day, and it really struck a chord with me. So I'd like to add that as a friendly, if the maker of the motion would be amenable to that.
I would prefer it be a motion to amend and have us vote on it. I think it's a complicated question, and we should all,
okay.
I think it, so that'd be my preference, which is why I didn't put it in the motion.
Okay.
So Councilor Evans, since there's a motion and a second on the table, this would be your opportunity to make a motion to amend, to add number 7, displacement assistance for legal no cause evictions, modeled after the City of Portland's mandatory relocation assistance code, to the phase 1 ordinance.
Yes, what you said, yes.
Second.
So now that amendment's on the table, and you'll want to discuss and vote on that before you proceed.
Yep. So I see several hands raised, so I want to make sure they're on this amended vote to amend. So, okay, Jennifer and then Mike.
I'll just save time. Thanks, Greg. That's what I was going to do. I'm in full support, and I'll let other people have their moment to talk.
Okay, Mike.
Same question, staff. What's the reason you put that into phase 2?
Part of it is that the legal analysis that the city attorney's office has done on the Portland code it only covers the Portland code. So it doesn't include any adjustment or calibration to Eugene. It doesn't include concepts proposed by local tenant advocates or other examples of similar codes, such as Bend or a hybrid of Portland and Bend's, what they have in place. So if council would want any deviations from the Portland code, that would require additional city attorney review, depending on the complexity of that. That could delay when the phase 1 ordinance would be brought for the public hearing. One example is that the Portland code allows rental owners to apply for an exemption. And there's at least 12 situations that could qualify for that exemption. And we haven't looked into those. We haven't presented that information to you to see whether you would like those exemptions. We can certainly provide you that information with the ordinance and for the public hearing, but we don't have that today.
Can you emphasize, for my recollection and for others, the financing mechanism here, how the money is collected and distributed in such case?
That's all done through the landlord and tenant. The city doesn't have a role in that, is my understanding. But our intent, again, was to be able to answer those kinds of questions when we brought you the phase 2 information.
In this particular case, could you describe the Portland model and how it works? Because that's what we're basing it on.
Genevieve, if you have that information, you can share it.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but the Portland model has 2 levels of when the relocation assistance is triggered. One is for a legal no cause eviction, and the other being a rent increase above 10% annually. And if that is done, then the relocation assistance that is offered to the tenant is based on a criteria of number of rooms per unit.
And it is entirely the landlord's responsibility to pay them that?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe so.
But there's no provision in here for a tenant who leaves a property that's been damaged. Is that correct?
In here, we have not presented to you a displacement assistance program today.
Let me try that differently. To the maker of the motion, is it your intent that people can damage a unit, not pay for it, and still force the landlord to pay for the assistance to move? In other words, upon leaving, whether they've been evicted or not, there's a big hole in the wall. And they say, that's above and beyond your deposits. We're gonna charge you for that. And if it's not paid, is the landlord still required to pay for someone's relocation assistance? To the maker of the motion, that's my question.
No, that wasn't necessarily my intent, Mike. But I do think that as someone's being evicted or being told that you're going to have to leave the property, that they get some assistance in making that move. Damages and other things like that, I think, are getting a little further in the weeds than I intended in terms of this particular motion.
How about if they owe back rent?
Okay, that's a whole nother thing. That's not what I'm trying to get to in this motion. I'm just trying to get to the fact that you need to get from one place to another place, a new place.
Right.
Then
making the landlord
the landlord has the option to pursue, all kinds of other legal remedies to recover damages and back rent and those kinds of things. We're just talking about moving assistance. That's what I'm talking about. But I would like a point of order, Mayor. We are past time and it's like 1:32. Can I move that we extend our conversation another 15 minutes so we can get through this?
Yes, please. All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That passes. Thank you very much.
So continue with my round here. I suppose I would say then that this is the reason I would recommend this is a phase 2 and not at this point, because staff isn't being sent away with clear instructions to what ordinance to bring back. And all I'm looking for then, maybe I misunderstood you, Greg, but are you saying the staff's ordinance they bring back should have carve outs for if the landlord doesn't have to pay that assistance if the person still owes them money for back rent and for damage in the place?
Sorry to interrupt, Councilor Clark. Those sound like for cause evictions, and displacement assistance is for legal.
What if the landlord doesn't say that though, and doesn't say it for cause, but just decides this is more of, because the tenant has said, oh, I'll take care of that, but they've had to wait forever and they haven't, and they take the option of a no cause eviction.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here, bigger picture than that. So the bigger picture piece for me here is exactly what you said. If we were bringing this back as part of phase 2, we would have a work session with you where we would have vetted that. We would have some recommendations. Without that, when you include both of those items in phase 1 and you still have a July deadline, staff is going to put something in an ordinance without any work session. It's like, I don't know how we're going to get that done and hit that timeline. So we will be either grabbing the Portland one and just putting it forward, and we'll see what the public feels about it, because we won't be able to do additional work sessions.
I'd like to move to postpone this discussion of this item alone until we hit the phase 2 discussions.
We have a second?
Is that just asking him to modify the motion to delete the?
No, I'm saying there's no way we have the ability to ask staff to come back with the stuff just as the manager said. So we should deal with this in phase 2. Just this one particular
just that item.
But and that's the sole source of this motion to amend. Yes. So it would just be voting down this motion to amend would accomplish exactly what Councilor Clark seeks.
Perfect.
Can we have a motion to be on the screen? Because I'm not sure I know what it is now.
Well,
motion to amend.
For point of order here, Mayor, I was asking not to have the vote on the amendment itself, but to have the vote on my motion to postpone consideration of this one item until staff is ready in the phase 2 discussions.
It hasn't received a second yet.
I believe it did, Mayor.
I don't think it received a second, and
I'll second.
All right, Alan has seconded.
So the only thing I would say to that is,
point of information, a motion to postpone, I don't think it's debatable.
That would be a motion to table.
Right. This is a motion to postpone to a date certain, which the date certain is now by November 1st. So that is debatable.
Yes, thank you. I made sure to do that, Matt, but I appreciate it very much. Catherine and I have had those arguments a few times. So the reason is I don't want it to appear as anybody's having to vote on their strong feelings about this particular item of discussion either way, other than we're not ready to make a decision and to push it forward. And that's why I'm asking for the vote on postponing, because it may be a very valid thing we want to pass. It's just that we're not ready to have that discussion.
okay, so there are hands up. Are they related to this motion to postpone? Emily, take it away.
Thank you. This one's really important to a lot of people, and it's really important to me, but it's important enough that I want to do it right. And it doesn't sound like we have enough information to really be solid on it. So I would prefer that we for sure get phase 1 through. I don't want to muddle that up so anything doesn't get through. But, city manager, can we do that? It sounds already that if we push it, we're just going to get Portland's code, which I'm not sure is right for us. So is it doable? I want to do it right. And then another question, Portland does it by room. Could we do it by rent? Because that seems much more reasonable to me. If I'm paying $500 a rent for rent, then I would need $1,500 to get the same kind of place. But if I'm renting, $1,500 a month, I don't know. I just would rather have that be by rent instead of rooms. I don't know if that's possible. So is that possible? And can we come back with a well-researched number 7 by the time we do phase 1?
My answer to that is I don't think we can and hit that July deadline. It's the deadline of before you go on your summer break that makes that really challenging, just based on this.
I think that's way too soon. And another thing that I come up with all the time, and I don't know how other people feel about it on this, but I don't like it when we put a whole bunch of things into one motion. So then I like to divide things, so we vote on them separately. I don't know if that applies here, and I'll wait for other comments.
Okay, thank you. Alan?
Could you make that view page width so we can see it? It's pretty small.
It's not page width?
So just
if
so
you go to view and then hit page width, it'll make it bigger.
So just for clarity about what is being discussed right now, this is the main motion put forth by Councilor Syrett. You have a motion to amend by Councilor Evans that adds to phase 1 the number 7 displacement assistance. And now what is being discussed is the motion to postpone voting on Councilor Evans' motion to amend until the phase 2 November 1st discussion. So on the table is postponing a vote on Councilor Evans' motion to amend.
Who's ever doing, if you go to view, right below the view thing, you go back to where you were.
Okay, you're confusing me. Just in case I screw this up. I'm gonna screw it up. What are you trying to get me to? Can you not see it?
I can see it.
It's really small.
It's readable. Could we, Alan, do you have other comments besides the size of the font?
Yes. Well, so I think phase 1 stuff is very important. And I want it to move forward as fast as possible. I've been asking for this work session since last summer. So I am more eager than everybody to get it right. And I don't want to delay the 4 items that are in the the number 4. And you have staff telling us they can't come back to us and do this right in the time frame you want us to do it. And I'm a little puzzled why we would continue to say, but we still want you to do it anyway. So I think having it done right and having this be part of phase 2 makes a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you. Matt?
I strongly urge a no vote on the suggestion to postpone. And I applaud Councilor Evans for underscoring a sense of urgency. It was, I would say, some grand total of $7,200 we had to hobble together to move in. How many hundreds of people have been evicted in the last year and a half here in Eugene? No cause evicted. Folks can't wait till November. We have 4 months to add in one element into the phase 1 recommendations that's already been vetted by the courts. So let's move forward with it for the 53% of our community who rent. Strongly urge colleagues to vote no and vote yes on the amendment and yes to advance recommendations that are in front of us. Thank you.
Okay, Claire.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a tough one. And again, I do recognize the urgency, but I think on this particular piece, taking a little more time and doing due diligence for our community is going to result in a better policy than if we attempt to shoehorn this into our phase one. It could also delay phase one. And I think the application and screening fee, which is the intention of the language, will bring some relief and is easier to modulate after a public hearing than this displacement protection program would be. Because I tend to agree with Councilor Semple. I think we might prefer to have a program that based the displacement for an eviction, not for someone deciding to vacate voluntarily, to modulate that to what the rent is that's being charged rather than the number of rooms. Like, you know, as I said, all of these recommendations coming forward may have been inspired by Portland's work, but they are not directly modeled on the Portland ordinances. They are reflective of the deliberations that have happened here in Eugene. So I would be supporting Councilor Clark's motion to postpone and not the motion to amend.
Thank you. Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm inclined to agree with Councilor Clark's motion. I mean, I wish we could act now, but I feel like we're pulling the cake out half baked. And then I'm also channeling Chris Pryor. Do you want it fast, cheap, or right? And I think we need to get this one right. So my apology to the renters that are suffering from this, but I just don't think we have enough right now to be acting responsibly. Thank you.
Okay, Emily, one more round and then let's vote.
Same deal. I really want this. People really want it. They've asked me to push for it right away. I would love to. And I don't want to negate any of those feelings or my determination, but I do not want to do it until it's right. Not perfect, but right. And if we just adopt something quickly because we don't have time, we're not serving our constituents. So it's hard. I want it fast. I want it right.
Okay, thank you all. The motion is on the table. This is a motion to postpone Greg's amendment. All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? 1, 2, 3. So the postponement passes. So now we go back to the original motion on the table that Claire presented. And Claire, did you have any language clarification on that? Or we're good?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just will clarify that I first apologize. I did modify number 8, so and didn't acknowledge that to be an application, and I would accept the friendly an application and screening fee cap.
And as I recall, Councilor Sayrett, you said the $10 when you read your motion, and okay. I don't see that in there. I just want to clarify if your motion that you made and that was seconded, it had that $10 cap in there.
Yes, I think it should. Yeah, and it did, according to other counselors. And just a little side note there. That's something, you know, that we can hold a public hearing on that. It's not a super complicated issue. We'll get public input. We could change the fee. We could modify it. We could decide not to do it. So unlike the displacement protection, I think it's something we can add to phase 1 without kind of taking the cake out half-baked, as Councilor Grove said. So we're back to the original motion.
We're back to the original motion. The language is in front of you. Alan, did you have one more comment? No. Okay.
And again, so just so I'm clear, what is on the screen is I don't believe the motion that you're actually voting on. So I want to make sure, because there is no
Sarah, can you add
$10
screening fee cap of $10? And I guess if we want to be precise, we would delete the reference to number 8.
Yeah,
that was the motion you made, though. This is not
okay.
So
Okay.
we're just trying to
So
capture
don't.
from-
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's only one and, but that's okay.
Okay.
That's just a typo.
Okay, so we're now good. Oh, Matt, a comment, question?
Yeah, Councilor Zelenka pointed out the need to have that phase 1 by July, by the time we break in the summer, and the motion just doesn't address it. I want to just make sure that we're hitting that timeline.
Right,
yes, it says prior to council.
Oh, prior, it says by summer break. I got it. Okay.
Okay.
I see November 1 and Feb 1. I didn't see a July 1, but summer break is accepted. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right, everybody ready to vote now? All in favor of this motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 opposed, 1, and that passes. Thank you all very much for delving into this, for very hard work, for your thoughts about this and your commitment to doing the right thing. And we only ran 2 minutes over our extended meeting. So thank you all. I hope you all have some time to catch your breath and relax during this council break. I think we're going to have a very busy April, May, and June. And so rest up, be in good shape, and we look forward to seeing you after the break. Thank you all.